Welcome to another episode of the 5enses podcast. I'm your host, Robert Zinni, and today we have a very special edition of our podcast where we have a team of experts in the education field from Save Our Schools Network here in Arizona to talk about different policies that we could be voting on in November and what does it mean to support public education here in the state of Arizona. Today's episode is sponsored by Bowen's Botanical, located at 212 North Cortez Street here in Prescott, Arizona, and we'll be hearing a little commercial later in the episode for that. Today's guests are Amy Bowser, president of the Humboldt Education Association and a fourth grade teacher at Lake Valley Elementary. We have Erinn Holloway, acting president of the Prescott Education Association and Bridges teacher at Granite Mountain. We have Carrie Hull from Save Our Schools Network, Northern Arizona Outreach Coordinator. Dawn Penich-Thacker, who is the co-founder of Save Our Schools Arizona, and Nicky Indicavitch, organizer for Arizona Center for Economic Progress. Good afternoon, ladies. How are we all doing?
Great. Thanks, Robert.
Thanks for having us.
No problem. I wanted to start off with just what does it mean for someone to be a pro-public education supporter?
I think that a lot of times voters will remember that you'll get something in the mail from a candidate when they're running for election, and they always list that they support education. But one thing that's important for us to push a little harder on is it's not enough to just support education in your language. You need to do it with your actions. And so we like to draw a distinction between education and public education, which is where 95% of Arizona students go. And so that means not just continuing the status quo when it comes to funding, it means adding funding to our schools. It's also an attitude of innovation and autonomy for our educators. Teachers need to be able to adjust what they do for every learner. Every teacher wants to be able to do that. So one sign of a pro-public education candidate might be that they don't want to tie funding to testing, for instance, that they want to increase funding to allow teachers to be creative, not just to punish or reward.
Thank you, Dawn. And so since we all are a group of educators or in the field of education, we developed this segment about using some vocabulary words that maybe citizens or people who aren't in the education realm don't know these vocabulary words. So what we're going to be doing is I'm going to give a vocabulary word or a word that is associated with education, and then our expert speakers will be answering or trying to give us a good definition of these vocabulary words. So the first one is for you, Dawn, and what does it mean about failing schools?
All right. Well, I'm an English teacher, so I love a vocabulary test. For failing schools, that's one that I would like to put forward, that there is no such thing as a failing school. There are schools that have been failed by our state government and kind of a historic, chronic refusal to adequately fund certain schools. Rural schools often bear the biggest brunt of this. Rural schools, low-income schools. So when we see low test scores, when we see problems with teacher retention, with not enough resources for our kids to thrive and succeed, that is not a failure of the school or of the teachers, or certainly not of the children themselves. It's a failure of our system, of our legislature, to give that school the tools it needs to help students succeed. So I would like to completely flip that vocabulary word on its head and say there's no such thing as a failing school. There are schools that we have not done right by.
All right, next is Nicky, and we've heard this a lot. Equal, not equitable.
Absolutely. So I love that I get 2 vocabulary words, lucky me. And these are 2 that cause a lot of conflict within this conversation. So what often happens is your typical voter will come to this conversation and say, I really want equal education access for every student. And I always say to them, you think you want equal, but you actually don't. What you want is equitable, meaning if a kiddo comes to a school and needs something more, let's say that they need a 501. Let's say that they need an IEP. Let's say that they've got some stuff going on at home and they need social emotional support, title services. We want those kids to get what they need. And it may not be the same for every child. You wouldn't run every child through Title I reading services. It's not necessary for a bulk of our students. And the same goes for the other side of this spectrum. Looking at gifted learning in Arizona, those kiddos have very different needs, need different resources. And the difference, I think, between the 2 is listening to your educators. If they come to a principal or a superintendent or a community member and say, this is what my kids need so that I can provide them an equitable education, we should listen to that need immediately, because they are not coming in without the knowledge base necessary to make that call. They've spent time with the kids, they understand the kids' needs, and they know what resources are necessary. When talking about equal schools, that would fail a large majority of our kids. If everything was the same, if everybody got the same services or didn't get those services, we would leave a huge bulk of our kiddos behind. And you would see 10% succeed in a mainstream equal funding system here in Arizona, and it just wouldn't work. And we've seen that specifically in rural schools, communities of color, lower income areas. That does not work. That's not a responsible approach to meet every child where they are today.
All right. The next one is for Amy. And Amy, you have results-based funding.
Yeah, so results-based funding is a formula that the state uses to reward schools based on a number of things. And one of those is how the students in their school perform on the standardized tests. And this kind of feeds into what Nicky was just talking about with equity. What we have found as educators and those of us in the educator community is that these funds go to a large part of students that are in wealthier communities or that are in larger cities. And so what we have found is those students that come from poverty, students with disabilities, students that are English language learners, or Latino, African American, and Native American students, those schools that service those populations tend to not be a part of that results-based funding. Also, our schools in rural Arizona are also left out of that pot of money that is set forth by the legislature. And so when we talk about, it's a part of that equity piece. We talk about equity and we talk about funding our schools and making sure that we are providing resources to those students in our schools that are really needing those services. We leave out a huge amount of our kids that need the money for those resources based on results-based funding.
All right, Nicky, you're up next. Accountable.
Accountable. I love this word because when you're talking about schools, it actually means nothing like what you would see in a standard definition. So accountable typically means you have given a task or a resource or a responsibility, and you have to answer for that task, resource, or responsibility. So here in Arizona, we actually have a pretty expansive accountability system when speaking about our district schools. One of the things that really shocks me about people's claim around accountability is they say, well, we want to see where the money's spent. We want to talk to the people making those decisions. Here in Arizona, it will take me about 2 minutes to find an email address for any elected governing board member in this state. It is very easy to do. It is not a complicated system. They all maintain those records publicly on their school websites. You can get a hold of those board members immediately. It would also take me about 5 minutes to find the budgets of every district school in Arizona. It is that clear. And not only can I find their budgets, I can also find their budgets they've signed off for the last 18 months. If you'd like to go further than 18 months, that's not much of a process either. Department of Education has those records as well. So accountable should mean you can go and find this information, any member of the public. That's what it should mean. And that's what it's set up here. What we're seeing is people want accountability to mean, I want to confirm what I think is true about your schools, and any other information is actually not the information that I want. So they want to be able to confirm that administrative spending is high, even though we all know it's not in Arizona and it has not been an issue for many years. They want to confirm that somebody's failing somewhere. They want to be able to say that you're spending too much money on something that doesn't help students. We don't see that in Arizona. Across the state, spending tends to be in the classroom. It tends to be support staff, very heavy towards retaining teachers these days. We see our boards doing a really good job of putting money, the little bit of money that they get, into resources that we know impact student learning in a positive way. But the problem with that is the political narrative tells people something different. It tells them that we are failing, that we are being dishonest somehow, that schools are not delivering student successes despite what we see out of our public schools. So they are looking for information that confirms something that doesn't actually exist. And that is where you see accountability being used as a weapon against our public schools.
Wow. Okay. I think I just learned something new about what it means to be accountable. You just really unpacked that. So thank you, Nicky.
Absolutely.
All right. The next one is going to Dawn with school choice.
Arizona has a ton of school choice. And what that means is that a parent can send their kid to the local district school that is listed on, when they buy a house or rent an apartment, or they can go to a different district school, a charter school, a private school. They can homeschool. We have all of those options in Arizona. But sometimes when school choice becomes an item of debate or of controversy is when it stops being about school choice and becomes the school's choice. So put the possessive on the school rather than the parent. What we see, the more and more we get into what we at Save Our Schools Arizona Network refer to as privatization, where schools are individually owned, private schools, for-profit models, is that it's the schools who are picking and choosing which students they want to accept, rather than parents having the choice of which schools they want their child to go to. And unfortunately, we see this most affecting children with disabilities, children with special needs. We see it affecting low-income communities and families. And so the notion of school choice is really kind of like a unicorn, a fantasy for so many people. And so that's why we say that having more choices, but only some of them being high quality and only some of them even being reachable, is really not a choice, not for the average family. And so instead, why don't we make the closest options, the local school, the neighborhood school, the free school, the best choice it can possibly be, so that every choice is a good one?
This particular issue really gets me going. So as a community activist, and hearing the word choice thrown in to kind of confuse people as to what it means to have public schools defunded and the taxpayer money funneled from public schools, like Dawn was saying, are neighborhood free schools that serve all demographics of children based on their needs. To have those schools defunded, what happens is that tactic actually removes your choice, because as I went to school here in Prescott, my children went to school. Taylor Hooks is my neighborhood school. They walked there, they were educated there. However, Miller Valley School, a couple of blocks away, if that would have been their school, Prescott Unified School District had to make a choice. They sold the school. It's now been paved over for a parking lot. So I am like so hot about this issue, because I know that that is actually also a lower income demographic neighborhood, and those children would walk to that school. So now what's their choice? So these are the things that people don't know about, and it's very simple, and it means something. So it actually means the opposite of what they say. Is we are providing the choice now. What we need to do is start funding our public schools and making them successful.
Next word is for Nicky again, and that's transparency.
I kind of touched on this a little bit. It's used right next to accountability, right? Transparency. We want to be able to see your books. We want to be able to see where you're spending money. We already have that. And it's not the responsibility of a school district or a local charter to shove that down voters' throats. They can't chase you down and mail you a budget. There's responsibility in being a voter. You can find it. It takes very little time, as I referenced before, a couple of minutes at the most. You can attend your school board meetings. If anyone ever tells you you cannot, you've got a lawsuit on your hands instantly. Those are open, those are public. Nobody's ever been turned away from any board meeting that I have ever heard about in the years that I've been doing this work. It's one of the first steps to really being a supporter of your community schools, is going to those meetings and gaining a deeper understanding of what those boards and those local charters are dealing with. What are their real numbers? When you say to them, we don't want to fund you anymore because we feel like you're overspending in this category, you better know that that's accurate, because what you will do by voting down bonds and overrides and statewide initiatives, if a district can't afford to cut in one area, they're going to go for another. And that could easily be an area that impacts students in a very negative way. That transparency piece is open to voters, but there's a responsibility to a voter to utilize that. They need to get on, they need to support that community school. And I think it ties right back to what I think Dawn had said. This community school requires buy-in from everyone. If it's failing, that's on the community surrounding it. That's not on those teachers, because they're still showing up. That's not on our superintendents, because they're still leading a healthy district that should, if supported, be good for kids. So that really falls on the community. And I've taken some heat for saying this, but you really see what a community values in how they treat their schools inside of it. And if they're demanding transparency without even bothering to look up the tools already available to them, then that word doesn't mean what they think it means.
And our last vocabulary word for this segment, we'll go back to Dawn. And Dawn, can you tell us what school grading means?
Sure. So earlier we heard a definition of results-based funding, and that results-based funding is often tied to grades that the state gives to our public schools. It's an A through F grading scale, just like we all remember from school. And the reason it's interesting and important in this conversation is what was referenced earlier, that a lot of times we see that the schools that are getting A's and B's are in higher income communities. We have a lot of A's and B's in the Scottsdale area, in the Paradise Valley area, in Phoenix Metro. We see a lot of these lower graded schools in rural Arizona, in low income communities. And so it's a very clear correlation that the grade a school gets is not actually an accurate representation of how smart those kiddos are, how hard those educators are working. What it is a reflection of how much resources, how much investment the community and the state is making in the school. And so we should really think about school grading as government grading. If a school is failing, it's because the representatives who are supposed to help fund that school are failing. And when a school is doing well, getting an A, you know that they are getting higher funding.
That wraps up the segment of trying to deconstruct some of this education jargon that will hopefully help voters and our citizens understand a little bit more of what we're actually voting for. And so we're going to take a quick break to hear from our sponsor.
Hey, I'm Kara Foster, owner of Bowen's Botanicals here in beautiful downtown Prescott. We're your local apothecary, curiosity, and floral shop. Come inside, let me show you around. We carry a selection of botanicals and apothecary items geared towards women's health, as well as rotating displays for local artists and a gallery space in the back. Come in and check us out. Our hours are currently 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Wednesday through Saturday, and by appointment Sunday through Tuesday. We'll be expanding our hours soon. Hope to see you soon.
So we're back with Save Our Schools panel discussion about education and education policy. And this segment, we are going to be doing a perspective highlight where even though we have some political activists here for our public schools, we also have some stakeholders in this. So we have Carrie Hull, who will be representing what the community member perspective looks like. And then we'll go into the parent perspective and the teacher perspective. And so we'll be hearing just a little bit of their individual thoughts about our education system through the lens of that stakeholder. So Carrie, you are a committed community member. You have worked on different local grassroots organizations from climate change to Save Our Schools. And so what is it being a community member that you see with public schools?
I am native Arizona and I grew up in Prescott. I went to public schools. It was great. Go Badgers. And then I moved back to Prescott and to raise my children. And so they also attended a variety of public, charter, and private schools. So I feel like I have a well-rounded perspective of the education system and what serves certain families. And I had no idea that public schools were struggling as far as funding. I was a parent. I was busy raising my kids, and then they went off to college, and then I was a campaign manager for a state Senate race here in LD1, and it was during the big Red for Ed movement, and so we were like, wow, let's go find out what that's all about. And so we got on that train, and we were at every rally. We learned about what was going on at the state legislature that I had no idea about. And so from then on, since 2018, I've had my finger on the pulse just as a community member, and this is a retirement community, so and rural, so that's kind of a double-edged sword. And there's a lot of retired teachers here. They want to help, they want to do things. So my passion is to try to connect the community with the reality and the truth and the facts about what's going on with our public schools, public district schools, and how do charter schools fit into that, and now what's going on with how do private schools receive public funds from taxpayers? People don't even understand, can't even draw that connection. And there's always just so much rhetoric going on. There's truth and lies. So I am so fortunate to be working with Save Our Schools, Northern Arizona Outreach, and so starting here in Prescott, we're having a information roadshow summer blitz that's going to start in June in Legislative District 1 for the school districts, and then we're going to move on over to LD6 over the Verde Valley. And so our goal is to just educate everybody so that they can be fully they can fully understand the struggles that our public schools and our teachers and ultimately our children are going to have if we cannot turn this around.
Next, we have Amy and Nicky. You both are parents and have children in the school district. So from a parent perspective, what's your pulse on where we're going with education?
So a little bit of background on me. I started this adventure as just a parent volunteer at the school that Amy teaches at. She's actually been one of my kiddos' teachers. I showed up, freshly moved out of Montana to Arizona, and just simply wanted to volunteer at my child's school, which turned out to be much more than I bargained for a couple years later. What I saw, I think, coming into the state from another state that does a better job with their public schools, what I saw coming out of that tiny little elementary school that really kind of lit my fire in this area was that everybody that I could get a hold of was doing their best. My my kiddos were showing up to play, right? They knew that if they messed around, mom was going to get them. They engaged in extracurricular activities. They did all the things as a student that they should do. And us as a family, we held up our end of the bargain here and made sure we support the educators and listen to what they're telling me about my kids. And my principal was doing a good job. She was fighting a losing battle, but she was doing her job. My superintendent, who I met shortly after coming here, just simply because I was shocked and I needed somebody to listen, he was doing a good job. He had a vision for our district. He was vocal about what his needs were. My school board members, who I also met through that, I guess you could call it initial rage, they were doing a good job. They seemed to have a really good focus on student needs in our district. And then I got to the point where I started to realize where the failures were. Once I had exhausted all options as a parent, and I had taken that step appropriately, I found the state legislature to be responsible for the impact to this little campus here in Prescott Valley. Every problem that I had as a parent, every concern that I had as a volunteer could be tracked back to this Arizona legislature pretty quickly, actually. It didn't take me long to figure out what portion of the budget they had gutted that led to my small campus not having counselors. It didn't take me long to figure out what portion of the budget led to the roof collapse that my son was exposed to. It didn't take long to figure out why I was fundraising for tissues and hand sanitizer. I could track it down to the minute when they cut library funding. I could track it down to the minute when they gutted teachers' salaries that caused a lot of my kiddos, talented teachers, to leave that campus. And the revolving door of educators that we were seeing in the first couple years that I was here. So for me as a parent, what frustrated me was having to go through all these local channels to get to a point at the state legislature where I knew that they were responsible for what had happened to my kids' school. And they shut it down pretty quickly. I mean, well, they attempted to shut me down. And they did not want to answer for that. And I got really, the first couple of months that I was doing this, I got really kind of brushed off up here in Northern Arizona. And so I decided if it's not going to be enough for me to go, then I'm taking everybody with me. And that's kind of where it started. And I had to get myself connected enough that what I was saying resonated. And it had to be scary. Like, we had to show up in big numbers. Northern Arizona had to form a coalition, because when we went on our own, they didn't listen. They were kind of like, oh, you're cute, see you at home. And it didn't do any good. And so as a parent, I'm annoyed that I've had to take it this far. I get frustrated oftentimes of what my kids have lost while I've been in this fight. It's a struggle in my family. And I know every activist on this panel and all across the state deals with that. What do you sacrifice? And do you miss that band concert because you're down at the Capitol and it's a rally? Do you sleep at the Capitol? I know Amy's been there sleeping on the Senate floor with me. And we do that. We leave our kids when we do that, and my husband, bless him, he's very patient with that effort. But we have to weigh it as activists. And I get very annoyed as a parent that I have to do that. I love the work that I do. I wouldn't change it for anything, but it would be great if we made a little headway, because my campus, 5 years later, I've been to DC talking about these counselors. We still don't have a counselor on that campus. We don't. We just cannot afford it. And that's frustrating as a parent. And I feel that frustration from a lot of parents when I meet with them. And I always tell them, get in the car. We're going to sleep at the Capitol, because you're where I was 5 years ago. And I know how frustrating that is. And it's almost like a mourning sometimes, like, we're not going to get the schools that our kids deserve. So we're just going to fight the whole time until somebody's kid is going to get better than mine did here in Arizona.
I would like to speak, I think, just personally as a parent in Arizona. I have two sons, 13 and 11. And for me, when Nicky talks about the mourning of our public school funding, I get angry at the fact that my own two children, and my oldest is going to be a freshman in high school this next year, has never been in a fully funded school. And I feel that, I see that, and it makes me upset and it makes me angry. And that is why I get up and I do the work. That is how I made the switch from being a teacher and a parent to an activist, because we have to speak out. We have to say, that this is not okay, that our schools are not funded. We're funded lower than we were in 2008. That is just bonkers to me. And I will keep screaming. I will keep yelling until we make change. And we do have the ability to make change in this election cycle. Another thing that, from a parent perspective, especially the schools here in Humboldt, is we have very strong parent organizations that support our schools. Like Nicky was saying, the fact that we look to our PTOs and our PTAs to fundraise to get us hand sanitizer and tissues and expo markers. That is the reality. And we are so thankful to have the parent groups that really help us in the classrooms, because our state has failed us as far as funding goes. And so really, as a parent, if you're a parent and you are looking to become more involved, I would say start with your parent organization at your school. If you're a community member and you want to go be a part of that organization, check into that, give them a call, go join meetings, and just see what kind of work that they're doing for our local schools.
Amy and Erinn, you are both teachers. And so please tell us a little bit about what your perspective is about teaching in this field, working in this field, and just observing and working really hard to make sure that every kid gets a great education.
A lot of our teachers, we will do whatever we need to get our kids what we need. But unfortunately, that comes out of our pockets, our own personal pockets. And I know in my marriage, my husband gets a little frustrated with the amount of money I put into my classroom. And I know that's probably part of the problem, is that we will go out of our way to fund our classrooms if the state won't do that. But especially in our community, the cost of living here is a lot. So when teachers do that, we often lose a lot of the teachers to other communities because they just can't afford to do what they feel is right with funding their classrooms as well as paying their bills. And it's really rough. And I think there's a disconnect also in our community. People just assume that things are funded because they see our classrooms and how the teachers have done such a good job at making sure that things are there, but they have no idea that it's the teachers that are providing those things. It's not the district's fault. The districts are doing the best they can. This community is doing wonderful things in our schools. The schools are great with what we have. But how much greater we could be if we were fully funded would be amazing. We could do some fantastic things that if we would just dream about it and just know that we need the funding, we need help. It's not good in our community, like when we're having the rotating drawer of teachers. It's not, studies show it's not good for kids. It's not good for the schools in general when we keep on having turnover of teachers. It's also not good for the emotional health of the school setting to have teachers that are not always not having consistent teachers. We have funding also has a lot to do with substitutes in the area. We have a substitute shortage in our area, and I think a lot of it is because we aren't able to pay our subs. They get, I think, less than minimum wage. Don't quote me on that. I'm pretty sure it's less than minimum wage what they get in this community for subs. And so then we are facing classrooms that we're doubling up on kids because we don't have a sub for our classroom. we are lacking some of the curriculum we should have. And we're doing our best. The district is doing their best. I'm really happy to be in our district, but we really need the community to get out there and vote for people who are going to fund our schools.
So when we talk about restoring funding levels to the 2008 levels, and I talk specifically about the moment that I woke up as an educator. So when I first started teaching, we did not have to spend any money in our classroom. So Erinn just spoke about the amount of money that teachers spend for supplies for their classrooms. I never had to put anything into my classroom. Supplies were given to the kids. Nowadays, we put a lot of responsibility on the families to provide supplies for their classrooms. Pre-2008, schools supplied all of those things. There was also, we had a small budget to be able to go to professional development in order to, become better teachers, to hone our craft. And that was something that teachers could count on every year. We would decide, which professional development, what was the new thing that we wanted to collaborate and work on or research. And so we were given money to do that. We were given, money for textbooks and programs and curriculum, and you didn't really have to think about it. And then the recession hit, and we actually, my husband and my young son, we only had one at that time when we moved to this area in 2007, I got hired right on. And that first year was 2008, and I was riffed. I was one of those that was handed my slip because of the huge bubble, the crash that was starting. I got hired back. But that was, it was an interesting time. And then slowly, the next year you got hired back, but you didn't have a pay increase. And we were frozen for 6 years here without any pay increase. And every other cost in our area was going up. Food, gas, rent, mortgage, everything else was going up, and we were just kind of stagnant. And then you start, okay, so now if you want something for your classroom, you're going to have to go out and buy it. We're going to ask parents to start bringing these in. If you want to do a professional development, I become really good at writing grants. I can write a grant like nobody's business. I've been able to write grants for flexible seating for my classroom, for supplies, for professional development. I get that, but slowly it sinks in, like, what is different? What is happening? And so when Nicky was talking about transparency and the fact that you can go to school board meetings, you can ask questions of your superintendent, you can figure out where money is coming from. About 5 years ago was really that moment where it was like, wait a second, this is not a district problem. This is something that is happening at our state level. This is a legislative problem. We are being cut. We are so severely underfunded. And so that is, I talk about 5 years ago, was really the moment that I woke up as a teacher and realizing that, wait a second, we have to be the ones to speak out. As teachers, we have to continue to tell our stories that are happening in our classrooms.
These questions are just going to help us try to wrap our minds around, where are the deficiencies in our education system, but also there's a lot of hot words or topic words that people use in their speeches or want to change the education system. And so I'm looking for clarity with all of these. What are vouchers and how do they impact public schools?
Vouchers, or private school vouchers, are a mechanism where a family decides, you know what, I don't want to go to one of the district or charter schools. I want my kid to go to a private school of my choosing, but I don't want to pay for it. So I'm going to go ahead and get a voucher where the state of Arizona says, okay, you want to go to a private school? We're going to give you the money, the tax dollars that were meant for the public school. We're going to give it to you. We're going to give it to you on a debit card, or we're just going to wire it straight to your account. And then you, as a parent, can go spend that however you want on private school tuition, or maybe a fancy tutor, or, maybe some therapies for your homeschool. In Arizona, these are called empowerment scholarship accounts. And they're private school vouchers where tax dollars are taken out of the public school, put onto a debit card or wire transferred to a parent's personal account. And the amount of tax dollars that are transferred to this debit card or personal account can range anywhere from about $5,000 per child per year, up to $40,000 per child per year of tax dollars given to individuals to do private personal education spending. Now, a lot of people, when they hear this, say, what? I didn't even know that's a thing. In Arizona, this started in 2011, so it's been almost a decade. When it started, the legislature said this is only for students with special needs, with disabilities, who may need to go to a highly specialized type of school, like an autism academy, for instance. And there was wide support around that, and there still is. In fact, my organization, Save Our Schools Arizona, supports the use for special needs kiddos who really need a different type of environment, perhaps, especially because of how underfunded our schools are. A lot of times, the local public school can't even afford the type of therapies and resources that that kiddo needs. And so, fine, private school vouchers for kiddos who may need to go to autism academies or deaf and blind academies, you know, things that anyone can really understand. But since 2011, our state legislature has been expanding and expanding and expanding the number and type of kids who can get these vouchers, to the point that now we are spending, as taxpayers, more than $200 million a year just sending kids to private, usually religious schools, while our public schools, both district and charter, are, as the other ladies talked about, fundraising just to have paper in a classroom, or putting 45 fifth graders in a room because they can't afford to hire another teacher in the public school. And just as a little quick factoid, in the Humboldt Unified District, the local Humboldt schools lose over $500,000 every year to private school vouchers.
Thank you for that knowledge. That's a really weird concept about taking public funds and going to private funds. Speaking of funds, all right, the next one is for Nicky and Dawn. So speaking of the voucher system, well, where does education funds come from, and what has been the trend at the state level about education funding policy?
Yeah, so I'll take the first one here. Arizona funding system is actually comes back to the conversation we had about equitable funding systems. We actually have a really good system here in Arizona for funding our schools compared to other areas. I don't know if you guys know much about the East Coast, but they do it predominantly based off of property tax rates, and that can cause serious discrepancies in access at the district level. So what we have in Arizona, which this is going to be very kind of, I'm going to try to button it down to a really small package. We have a system that's equitable. So what happens in Arizona is the state legislature sets a number that we are currently funding kiddos at. I hate to use the word worth because it just really undermines what we do in education as a whole, but it is what a child is considered worth to the state legislature. From that point, once they have set that number, they go to local property taxes to fund it. So in some areas, all of that number is funded by local property taxes. Prescott is pretty close to being 100% funded by local dollars. Paradise Valley, I think, is. Scottsdale Unified is. Some of those more affluent areas, they have the property tax money to cover that entire expense. Other areas do not. Humboldt does not. We're about 50-50. We have property tax value worth about 50% of what a kiddo needs to be educated in Arizona, according to the legislature. And so the state will come in and kick in those additional dollars. So the state will make sure that even if your local property taxpayers don't have that money based on their rate and who's paying in, the state will make sure that you you get to that number. Now, that sounds very equitable, extremely equitable. And if the system stopped right there, it would be done. We would have very different schools that would serve students in a way that they needed. We could raise that overall number, and we would be good to go. And you would see equitable education across the board, right? You would see that because everybody would be at the same amount. Here's the problem, and I think that Dawn's going to touch on this. We had a system that was equitable. We had a system that worked. We had a system, that could be good, but the number needed to go up. Then we introduced bond and override elections. And that is where you see the entire system flip on its head. I think, Dawn, are you going to take that, or do you want me to run through bonds and overrides?
Go for it.
Okay. So then what we introduced was the ability for local taxpayers to approve their own tax increase to fund schools. This was originally brought out to help with building expenses. In areas that were growing, you needed a new elementary school, you would approve a bond. That way you could build it. You would bond out for those dollars and build yourself a new school. What happened after the recession was schools were cut so badly that in order to keep the lights on, so to speak, they went out for local bonds and overrides. They went out for bonds that covered HVAC that should have never been a bond issue. They went out for bonds that covered furniture, technology. And you've seen this across Arizona. And one thing that is interesting about that is that they get approved at a very high rate. We see anywhere from like 65 to 80% approval on bonds and overrides. But that number is substantially higher in affluent communities that can afford to increase their own taxes. So if you look at an area like Prescott or Humboldt, if they have a bond and override in place, which Humboldt does not, Prescott does, it is substantially smaller than their needs because they know that their local taxpayers cannot afford to increase their own tax rates. So Scottsdale, Paradise Valley, not to pick on them because I think they're great districts doing beautiful things for children, but they approve large $250, $350 million bond packages and 15% overrides to make up for what our legislature has done to them. And they deliver on that. They have some great schools, some beautiful facilities, but districts that are small or rural or low income, they don't have bonds and overrides. And so they're stuck at that number coming from the state. They're stuck there. They can't go any higher. And if they do, it's typically a smaller amount than what they need. And that is where you see this system get completely upside down and unfair for certain communities. They're left behind in the bond and override fight. They can't approve them. And what they do approve is way under what they need.
We've referenced kind of the Great Recession and 2008 a few times in this conversation. The Great Recession affected every state in the every state, right? And even outside of the US. But one fact that's really shocking is that no state cut education funding more than Arizona. So when the Great Recession hit and everyone had to scale back, everyone had to, scramble and figure out how to get through that, Arizona, above any other state in the nation, cut our education budget to the bone. And even though the Great Recession is over and past and our economy has recovered until COVID, Arizona never put that money back. So this accounts for a lot of voter confusion. When you see them every single year, it sounds like they're saying they added to education budget, they added education funding. That is true, but they didn't add enough to ever make up for what was cut back in the Great Recession. And so that's why it can get really confusing on who you're voting for. They all say that they voted for the teacher pay increase, for instance. But what you need to know is that teacher pay in Arizona had gotten so low. We were literally the worst paid teachers in the entire country. So when that big so-called 20% raise happened, even if a teacher in Arizona got the full 20%, which most did not, even if you did, that only raised us nationally by one ranking. So after a 20% so-called raise, Arizona teachers are still 47th in the nation for pay. And so when someone is graduating college and they want to be an educator and they're looking at their options, we're literally the least attractive possible option, because not only are they going to make less, they're going to have to supply their own classroom and fight for chalk for the chalkboard and markers for the whiteboard. And so when you hear about education funding, when you're looking at school board candidates, legislative candidates, the questions, unfortunately for voters, have to get pretty specific and nuanced, because it's not just, do you support schools? Did you vote for funding? How much? And was it for public schools or for private school vouchers? Back to the quick little fact, just making a full circle back to those vouchers. This year, our state legislature in February 2020 voted to start sending Arizona public education funding to private schools in other states. So our legislature voted that Arizona tax dollars could be taken out of Arizona public schools in order to pay for private school in California, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, and Utah. And so if that person is asking to be sent back to the legislature, as a voter, I would encourage everyone to ask how they voted on out-of-state vouchers. And if the answer is that they supported them, then that is not a public education advocate.
Thank you for that. And now we're going into a nice segue with Amy about what's the reality of rural teacher salaries.
I think that, Dawn hit a lot on that when she was discussing our teacher pay and where we are 47th in the country. But the reality with our rural schools, and we really feel it here, is especially in our Quad City area, our cost of living here is much higher than it is in some of the larger areas in the Valley or even in Tucson. And it's hard to be a single teacher and to support a family if you are a single parent on a teacher salary. And it's hard to do that in the Quad City area. And so the reality in the past 12 years that I've been in this area is a huge turnover. And teachers in this area, not only teachers, but administrators, superintendents, directors, they are leaving this area to go where there is more funding. So they're either leaving this area to go to other states where they can make more, where they can provide for their families, or they're going to the Valley where some of those school districts, like Nicky was talking about, can fund at a higher level. They might go to a district that can provide one-to-one technology, things that we just can't seem to do here. And so the reality of being a teacher in rural schools is you make a choice to be here. My husband and I, we moved to this area because we love this area. This is where we wanted to raise our kids. Is it the most, do I get the highest rate of pay here? I mean, I have my master's degree. I've been teaching for 20 years. And in this area, could I go elsewhere and could I make a considerable more amount of money? Absolutely. But I stay here because I love this community.
This is for Carrie and Dawn. What makes a candidate a pro-public school candidate?
What the Arizona Education Association did in 2018 is they tried to put through a proposition that's called Invest in Ed. They're doing the same this year, but it got dropped off and did not make the ballot in 2018. So they did very clever. They asked every candidate running for office in Arizona if they would take an Invest in Ed pledge. And so like Dawn had said, are you going to support the expansion of the ESAs, which are school vouchers? And they would have to answer. And so they went through a pledge. And for those that supported pro-public education, we were able to help get those candidates elected. So, or at least go door to door and educate the community on the truth about, whether they say, yes, I support public education, but we made them dive deeper in answering those questions that truly make them a public education candidate.
This is a lot for any voter to try to remember when they go to a town hall or look at a candidate's website. So I would just boil it down to a few questions you can ask a candidate or look for on their materials. Do they support private school vouchers? If the answer is yes, we need more of those, that person is not supporting public education. If you ask them, what is more important? Should we get some new tax cuts or should we put some new funding in education? The answer needs to be fund education as opposed to new tax cuts, because that's really at the heart of this issue. Arizona gives away more tax cuts than we collect in revenue. And, sometimes that can feel like, good, everyone loves a tax cut, right? But we're still paying for it. We're just paying for it through a different means. And so we don't need more tax cuts that are only helping certain populations. We need to collect enough revenue to actually invest in the schools that are producing our nurses, doctors, construction workers, accountants, attorneys, small business owners. So I would just boil it down to those three questions. Do you support private school vouchers or not? We want a not answer. And which is the priority, tax cuts or funding for schools? We want to hear funding for schools above tax cuts.
Thank you for that clarity of what makes a pro-public school candidate. And that was a great segue to our last question, everyone. So, 2020 election year cycle. And so this one's for Nicky and Amy. So if I'm just a citizen or even a parent or a teacher, a concerned community member, what are some things voters should know about this year's upcoming election and ballot initiatives? Speaking
about the Invest in Ed Act, it is back. This is a citizens initiative that we are currently collecting signatures to get it on the November ballot. I would encourage you to check out what the ballot language looks like. You can visit investined.com. But essentially what Invest in Ed does is it restores hundreds of millions of dollars annually to K-12 education. And this is funding that will go towards solving the teacher shortage crisis, lowering class sizes, hiring our classified aides and counselors in our schools. And then also the money goes towards expanding career and technical education. And this initiative also assures for accountability. So that is a steady funding stream that is earmarked directly for schools. And so the legislature cannot come and kind of sweep that money away. That is a dedicated funding source, and it restores funding. It's nothing new. It just restores the funding. So we've talked a lot about that, the 2008 funding levels.
One thing that we've done in Prescott Valley is encourage voters to flip their ballot over and start from the back. The reason that we are suggesting that is because most of the issues that impact schools are going to be at the end of your ballot. And what we've seen is during presidential years and even off years that are busy, people don't make it all the way through their ballot, which is devastating because some of those issues that impact your daily lives are at the end of your ballot. So everybody knows it starts with presidential and national, it runs through statewide, and then it goes into initiatives.
Excellent. Thank you for that tip. I think I'm going to start doing that in every ballot, because I think you're right. We all focus on the politicians, but really what really impacts us is the ballot initiatives and learning what the jargon is in them. So you're voting for the right yes or no, because I know that that's tricky on that as well. Well, ladies, I had a pleasure getting educated by everyone about different jargon, but also really wrapping our heads around why funding education is super important for public schools and the differences between private schools and public schools. So I want to say thank you for that. Thank you to our sponsor, Bowen's Botanicals. And also, if you want more information about Save Our Schools Arizona, go to sosarizona.org, and we will also put their information and when you can sign their initiatives in the description when this is posted. For more information about the content coming from 5enses, check us out at 5ensesmag.com, and also check us out Facebook and Twitter and Instagram